Hey friends, it's Jimmy here with the usual reminder to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Hitting the bell helps me out a ton in the algorithm, and it makes it much more likely that my new videos will hit your homepage. Also, don't forget to drop a quick comment saying where you're watching from, or just drop a quick, "I'm doing my part" comment. It's March 1993. More than a year has passed since anyone has seen Kimberly Pandelios. Hikers are moving through a remote, rugged section of the Angeles National Forest, far from any marked trail. They're near an isolated wooded area known as the Cement Slab, which includes a small creek bed not far from the Monte Cristo campground. There, they find it. Not a complete body, not anymore. They find a human skull and a pelvic bone. This grim discovery is the first real break in a case that had been frozen solid for 12 months. Kimberly Pandelios, a 21-year-old aspiring model, had vanished on February 27, 1992. Her disappearance was a complete mystery until this moment. When forensic teams arrive at the cement slab, the scene tells a story of terrifying brutality. Scattered near the skull, they find a pair of handcuffs, Kimberly's ring and earrings, and her fractured mandible, or jawbone. They also recover a bra and pantyhose. Both garments had been severed by a sharp object, like a knife or razor. This fragmented discovery in the wilderness was the first halting step in solving a slaying that would ultimately take another 12 years to close. To understand the scene in the forest, we have to rewind to February 27, 1992. Kimberly Pandelios was 21, ambitious, and trying to build a career as a model. She saw a modeling recruitment advertisement and answered it, believing she was scheduling a meeting with a professional magazine photographer. That day, she was seen dressed for what she thought was a job interview: a blue suit, a white blouse, and high heels. But the advertisement was a lie. The quote-unquote photographer was David Raidmaker, 28 years old at the time. The entire photo shoot was a predatory ruse to assault young women. Kimberly drove her car to meet him around 1 p.m. at a secluded location on the Angeles Crest Highway near the border of the National Forest. When they met, Raidmaker made his overture. Kimberly rebuffed him, but he didn't take no for an answer. He overpowered her, committed disgusting acts against her, and then pushed her head into a nearby creek. He held her there until she drowned. Her ambition had been expertly used against her, a specific lure to draw in a young woman willing to take a professional risk, leading her instead into a deadly trap. The slaying was just the beginning of Raidmaker's work that day. Later that same evening, a Los Angeles deputy sheriff on patrol noticed Kimberly's car. It was parked on the shoulder of the Angeles Crest Highway, just north of the Monte Cristo campground. The deputy noted it appeared vacant and in good condition and drove on. But Raidmaker wasn't done with it. He returned to the vehicle, and this time, he brought an audience. With him was a different kind of victim, a 14-year-old girl whom he had groomed. She was unaware of the slaying and watched as Raidmaker squirted charcoal lighter fluid inside the car's cabin and set it on fire. At some point during the blaze, Raidmaker informed her of what he had done, trying to instill fear into this living victim. The deputy later returned and witnessed the vehicle on fire, astutely observing it came from the front passenger side and not the engine department. He believed this was a clear indication of arson intended to destroy evidence. Raidmaker's decision to bring the 14-year-old was a profound miscalculation on his part. He was trying to bind her to him through fear and a shared secret, implicating her in a major felony. Instead, he had just created the only living witness who could place him at the scene of the cover-up. In his haste, he also left a trail. Near the burned-out car, police recovered the tools of the arson: an empty charcoal lighter fluid container, a plastic lighter, and one other tiny crucial item, a single handcuff key. The discovery of the burned car and the handcuff key in February 1992 was a start, but it led nowhere. There was no victim, so there was no case. The investigation went cold almost immediately. It was hikers, not police, who found the rest of the evidence, piece by piece, over the next 3 years. A month after Kimberly vanished, hikers found her appointment book at the bottom of a bridge near a creek. Then, a full year later, in March 1993, came the grim discovery of her skull and pelvic bone at the cement slab. This find triggered the full forensic recovery, which uncovered the fractured jawbone, her jewelry, and the severed clothing. Most importantly, that team found the other half of the puzzle, a pair of handcuffs. This was the moment the two crime scenes were forensically linked. A key found at the car fire, and handcuffs found with the body. The evidence, though separated by a year and a mile, told a clear story. The perpetrator bound his victim, slew her, and then torched her car, accidentally dropping the key in the process. The forest had given up its secrets, but the case still had no suspect. For 12 years, that's where it stayed. The case was a collection of grim, disconnected facts. Then, in January 2004, the matter finally broke open. It happened because of a bizarre convergence of events. A cold case unit decided to reinvestigate Kimberly's disappearance. This happened, coincidentally, right after David Raidmaker was released from prison for a string of unrelated crimes. His freedom is what made the case solvable. For 12 years, the prime suspect had been off the streets, and his release put him back on the radar. The police got incredibly lucky, and they learned that Raidmaker, a systemic predator, had confessed. During an illicit relationship with another 14-year-old girl, Raidmaker had driven her to the Angeles forest. He'd bragged to her, confessing that he had slain a pretty blonde model that he lured there through the classifieds. But that wasn't why he was so proud of what he had done. He told her that he was famous. His handiwork had been featured on the show Unsolved Mysteries, and that tens of millions of people had heard about his crime. However, according to her, he was extremely upset that the show had said that the likely suspects were outlaw bikers. When she told the cops, they were able to obtain the old footage and saw that this biker theory was in the episode. Raidmaker's extreme arrogance had just provided the external validation for his own secret confession. Armed with this story, investigators knew exactly who to talk to. They found the 14-year-old girl who had watched Raidmaker burn Kimberly's car 12 years earlier. Disturbingly, according to court records, her name had been in the case file in relation to the car arson investigation, and she had been recorded as Raidmaker's girlfriend. This was despite the fact that she was 14 years old and he was an adult. Now an adult in her mid-20s, she agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. It was an incredibly brave act, forcing her to re-engage with the man who had controlled her. The police outfitted her with a wire and staged a surveillance operation. During these recorded conversations, Raidmaker's past tactics were turned against him. She used the quote-unquote trust he had built through grooming to get him to talk about that night in 1992. And he did. Raidmaker was recorded admitting that he had set fire to the car, but he wasn't willing to go so far as to admit to the crime. But it didn't matter. That was it. It was the final nail. It corroborated the 1992 deputy's arson report. It linked him to the car, which, via the handcuff key, linked him to the body. It was all confirmed by his own bragging confession to the other girl, and police arrested David Raidmaker during the surveillance process. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury heard how Raidmaker had lured, abducted, and drowned Kimberly Pandelios, and they convicted him. Raidmaker's legal battles, however, continued for another decade. His appeals went all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. Notably, he didn't argue his innocence in the slaying. Instead, they focused on a technicality, an erroneous jury instruction regarding the element of asportation. Asportation is the legal term for the moving away of the victim, a necessary proof for kidnapping. The judge appears to have tipped his hand about his belief in the jury instruction regarding this portion of the crime. The defense argued this flawed instruction meant the finding of guilt was invalid. In essence, the defense said that the case ought to be overturned and sent back for a new trial on the basis of this flawed instruction. This wouldn't mean he was found not guilty, but rather that a new trial would have to be held on the basis of the improper instructions. The defense was, of course, banking on the fact that witnesses wouldn't want to go through the process again, or perhaps they couldn't. For instance, if a key witness was no longer alive, that would make convicting him again very difficult. Ultimately, the result of this argument was shocking, at least to a certain degree. The courts listened and ultimately agreed the instruction was flawed, but they also found that it didn't matter. They ruled that it was a harmless error and that the objective evidence for the actual crime was so overwhelming that the jury's findings stood. All out of appeals, David Raidmaker will remain behind bars for the rest of his life for the tragic 1992 slaying of Kimberly Pandelios. Picture the silence in the Aldridge family home, heavy and suffocating. It's the first day of July 1979, and 20-year-old Tammy Sue Aldridge is gone. She went for a jog the day before and never returned. Then, the phone rings, shattering the quiet. It's her. She's alive. Her family hears her voice. But this isn't a rescue. She calls again the next night, Monday, July 2nd. She was, according to the investigation, allowed to make these calls by her captor. Her captor is demonstrating his power, forcing her and her family to participate in a 3-day nightmare. Those 2 calls were the last time her family would ever hear from her. The next time she was found, it would be in a way that would haunt Alamance County for decades. Tammy Sue was a young woman with a clear and compassionate future. She was 20 years old, a college student at East Carolina University, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. At a press conference 45 years later, her family, still grieving, shared her specific ambition. She was studying to become a physical therapist. Her dream was to work with the elderly, helping them recover from injuries sustained in falls. This was the person who, on Saturday, June 30th, 1979, laced up her shoes for a routine jog near Jim Barnwell Road in northern Alamance County. She was a person whose entire identity was built around care, on a path to a life of service. But on that summer day, she crossed paths with someone whose intentions were the exact opposite, and her bright future was stolen. The agonizing, hope-filled wait and the 2 phone calls came to a brutal end in the early morning hours of July 3rd, 1979. Tammy's body was discovered. The way she was left speaks volumes about the perpetrator's disturbed mindset. She wasn't hidden in the woods or buried in a shallow grave. She was dumped in the middle of Highway 54, near the intersection with another well-trafficked road. It was a public, brazen, and depersonalized act, a way of discarding a person as if they were nothing. But the crime itself was horrifically personal. The evidence at the scene told a story of complete control and violence. Her ankles were bound. The medical examiner's report was grim, confirming she had been indecently assaulted. The official cause was strangulation. In the midst of this 1979 horror, Investigators did one thing right, one thing that would prove more important than any other piece of the case. They collected and preserved the male biological evidence from Tammy's body. This sample would become the case's silent, unimpeachable witness, patiently waiting 45 years for science to give it a voice. The pressure to find the person responsible for such a shocking crime was immense, but the initial investigation would only lead to more pain for the Aldridge family. Authorities did identify a suspect in the months following the slaying. The Aldridge family had to steel themselves, believing justice was finally at hand, and endure a full criminal trial. They had to watch as the man they believed ended their daughter sat in a courtroom. And then, the system failed them. The case collapsed. The man was found not guilty and acquitted. This legal failure was a second devastating blow. The case was now poisoned, and for all practical purposes, it went cold. While the system was focused on the wrong man, the real perp was living just miles away, hiding in plain sight. His name, we now know, was Gary Laframboise. In 1979, he was 19 years old and lived in Graham, North Carolina. His residence was just 4 miles from where Tammy's body was found, placing him squarely in the geographic profile of a likely suspect. And here's the most shocking part of the entire 45-year mystery, the near miss that is almost too painful to contemplate. The police had him. Just 3 months after Tammy was slain, while the investigation was still active, Laframboise was arrested. He was charged with kidnapping and, in a detail that would echo throughout the subsequent investigation, impersonating a police officer. One can only imagine how a predator might use that authority to stop a young woman jogging on a rural road. While in custody for those charges, Laframboise proved his capacity for extreme violence by breaking the skull of a prison guard. Somehow, despite his extreme portfolio of known offenses, and despite being found guilty of everything, he only served time from 1980 to 1982. In retrospect, the connections are quite staggering. A local 19-year-old living nearby, arrested for kidnapping, who uses a police impersonation ruse and is pathologically violent. Yet no one in 1979 connected his file to Tammy's. The system had the perpetrator, and they didn't know it. After the acquittal, Tammy's case file was effectively sealed and buried. It became one of Alamance County's most infamous and painful cold cases, a debacle that haunted the community and the investigators who had worked it. For decades, there was nothing but silence. The case remained frozen in time until 2002, when a new sheriff, Terry Johnson, took office. Johnson made it a personal and professional priority to apply new resources to these old, forgotten cases. He and his team began the painstaking process of rebuilding the Aldridge investigation from scratch. The task was made even more difficult by decades of institutional neglect. They found that crucial files and records from the original 1979 investigation had, at some point, been disposed of by the police department, despite the fact that it wasn't closed. The key to solving the case wasn't in the lost police reports. It was locked away in an evidence box, waiting. One intrepid detective managed to locate a box full of that male biological sample, and this is where science bridged the 45-year gap. Forensic technicians, using technology that was science fiction in 1979, were able to develop a complete profile from that tiny, degraded sample. But this wasn't an easy win. The perp's DNA wasn't in the federal database. The breakthrough came from a revolutionary new field that I may have mentioned once or twice before: forensic genetic genealogy. They submitted the profile to genealogical databases and found a partial match, not to Laframboise, but to his relatives. By painstakingly building a family tree from that match, investigators were led to a DNA sample from Laframboise's own daughter. In April 2024, nearly 45 years after Tammy's death, the Alamance County Sheriff's Office held an emotional press conference. They announced to the world that the case was solved. Sheriff Terry Johnson, visibly moved, described it as a day of mixed emotions. It was a sad day, he explained, because it had taken 45 years to provide an answer, and sad because it forced the Aldridge family to relive the loss all over again. But it was a glad day because they could finally, definitively, name the man responsible. But the resolution came with one final bitter twist. There would be no trial. Gary Laframboise, the man who evaded justice for the 1979 slaying, would never face a jury. He had died in South Carolina in 2020. Notably, the only photograph of him I was able to find depicts the predator as a much younger man. Justice, in the end, was incomplete. The Aldridge family received an answer, but they were denied accountability. At the 2024 press conference, the sheriff's office made a critical and chilling statement that they, quote, can't confirm if he acted alone. This is a massive, haunting question. Think back to the crime. A 3-day captivity. The victim kept alive. Those 2 allowed phone calls. The police clearly have suspicions that this wasn't just the work of a 19-year-old lone wolf. The 45-year search for justice for Tammy Sue Aldridge has closed one chapter, only to open another, filled with new and perhaps unanswerable questions. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just taking a moment to plug my Patreon and the YouTube membership. It's a great way to take your support to the next level, and the best part is you can do it for as little as $1 a month. When 19-year-old Lindy Sue Beckler's aunt and uncle arrived at her apartment on the night of December 5th, 1975, they expected to exchange recipes and keep her company. This was a comforting routine born from Lindy's recent fears that someone was watching her in her Manor Township home in Pennsylvania. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. Blood stained the front door, the entryway wall, and the carpet inside. Lindy's body lay on the floor near the living room, showing signs of the brutal attack. She had been stabbed numerous times, and the weapon was left at the scene. Horrifically, the knife was from Lindy's own kitchen, suggesting the perpetrator grabbed it at the scene. Later, forensic analysis showed that a second knife had also been used and taken away by the attacker. Investigators recovered critical forensic clues: the attacker's biological material on Lindy's underwear and 2 small drops of blood on her stockings. These clues would eventually be the key to cracking the case decades later using genetic genealogy. Lindy's new husband, Phil, was quickly ruled out as a suspect, and within weeks, police had interviewed about 300 people in the area without any luck. Despite the bloodshed, the perpetrator had left behind no obvious fingerprints or identification. Investigators noted a footprint in the kitchen believed to be the perpetrator's, but this led to nothing at the time. They also sought information on a dark-colored car seen double-parked outside the apartment around the time of the attack, but this lead also fizzled out. As the weeks turned into months, the case that shocked Lancaster County threatened to go cold. Determined to find justice, authorities chased every tip and potential lead. In early 1976, just 1 month after Lindy's slaying, police caught a dangerous suspect in another case. This was Mark Capilupo, an 18-year-old arrested for a string of violent attacks on local women. The young man had assaulted several women around the same time as Lindy's slaying, fueling hope that he might also be responsible for Lindy's death. Investigators noted similarities in the violence and eagerly interrogated Capilupo, but after careful scrutiny, he was cleared of involvement in the attack. It was a devastating disappointment for detectives in the community, and many thought the cops had dropped the ball. Capalupo was jailed for his other crimes and would end up being pumped full of lead during a prison escape attempt a year later, ending his reign of terror. Some thought this was a fitting end for the person responsible for Lindy's death, but it turned out the real perp was still at large and would be for decades. As the first anniversary of Lindy's death approached, the case took an unsettling turn. In December 1976, visitors to Lindy's grave discovered that her headstone had been vandalized. It was doused in red paint and slashed with something sharp. Whether it was a cruel prank or the perpetrator returning to relive the crime, police couldn't be sure. Then, only weeks after the gravestone incident, a chilling letter arrived in the mail for Lancaster's police chief. The letter claimed to be from the perpetrator, taunting the chief for failing to catch him. In disturbing detail, the letter's author referenced specifics of the crime scene not known to the public. He bragged that the red paint and nicks on Lindy's gravestone represented each wound he had inflicted. The letter provided further weird details. He described himself as a chubby man who had done it while under the influence of substances. Bizarrely, the letter ended with someone signing the name Janice Crum, claiming to be a friend, finishing the message and begging for help for him. Needless to say, the investigators were stunned. The letter contained details about the slaying and grave defacement that had never been publicized, so the cops thought it was likely from the attacker. That said, they had some doubts, though. The writer hinted he might confess if the letter was printed in the newspaper, but authorities agonized over how to respond. In the end, police decided not to publish the rambling note, wary of giving him notoriety or playing into a possible hoax. After all, the writer may have simply made lucky guesses that matched the crime, or details of the investigation could have leaked through one of the 300 interviews. They tried to trace the letter's origin and the mysterious Janice Crum, but hit a dead end, and no such person could be found. Notably, whether this letter was a bizarre confession or simply a hoax would remain an unsolved mystery forever. Over the years, investigators periodically revisited the evidence with fresh eyes. As early as 1997, DNA technology offered a glimmer of hope. Technicians were able to extract a male DNA profile from the preserved biological material. In 2000, that DNA profile was uploaded into the FBI's database of convicted offenders, but no match was found. The unknown subject had no prior record that would link him to the crime. The case stagnated once more, but crucially, the DNA evidence was safely stored. Investigators understood that forensic science was advancing rapidly, and that one day, a new technique might crack the mystery that traditional detective work could not. In 2019, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office formed a dedicated cold case unit, and Lindy Sue Beckler's file was at the top of the pile. They reached out to a Virginia-based genetics company, Parabon Nanolabs, to apply cutting-edge DNA analysis to the old evidence. Parabon's forensic experts first used DNA phenotyping to generate composite images of what Lindy's attacker might have looked like. From the crime scene DNA, they predicted the suspect's physical characteristics, then created two sketches, one reflecting a man about 25 years and another of a man around 65. The phenotyping suggested a light-skinned white male with hazel eyes and dark hair. These composite sketches were released to the public in 2019, briefly reigniting interest in the case. But while the images put a hypothetical face to the perpetrator, they still didn't provide a name. For that, investigators would need to dig deeper into the suspect's lineage. By late 2020, the team enlisted a renowned genetic genealogist, Cece Moore, working with Parabon to build the perpetrator's family tree. From the strands of family connection, Moore painstakingly constructed ancestral lines, zeroing in on one family in particular. The DNA pointed to roots in a small town in southern Italy, and this clue proved pivotal. In fact, Moore's research suggested that whoever attacked Lindy Sue Beckler had ancestors from Gasparina, Italy, an unusual detail that dramatically narrowed the field of suspects. Cross-referencing this specific Italian heritage with local records, Moore and her team identified a single name that fit all the data points. This was David Sinopoli, a man of Italian descent who had lived in Lancaster at the time. Investigators were stunned by the lead. David Sinopoli was a now 68-year-old resident of Lancaster County who had never been on their radar. Decades earlier, however, he had lived in the very same 4-unit apartment building as Lindy Sue Beckler. In fact, he was a neighbor of Lindy's in 1974, a year before the slaying, but had since moved out. He had no obvious connection to Lindy on record beyond being a former neighbor, and no serious criminal history. But now, thanks to genetic genealogy, he was the prime suspect. Investigators knew they needed direct evidence to conclusively tie him to the crime, namely, a fresh sample of his DNA to compare with the crime scene profile. In February 2022, a surveillance team quietly tailed David Sinopoli as he traveled through Philadelphia International Airport. They watched as he sat in a terminal coffee shop with his wife, casually chatting before a flight, and noted when he finished his coffee and tossed the cup into a trash bin. The moment Sinopoli walked away, investigators swooped in and retrieved the discarded cup. At long last, they had it. A covert sample of Sinopoli's DNA. Back in the lab, forensic analysts compared DNA from the coffee cup against the old biological sample from Lindy's body, and it was a direct match. In fact, the probability of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Sinopoli was astronomically low, on the order of 1 in 10 trillion. On July 17, 2022, police moved in and arrested David Sinopoli at his Lancaster home. The 68-year-old was taken into custody without incident, ending one of Pennsylvania's oldest cold cases. News of the arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Sinopoli had been an unremarkable presence in Lancaster for years. He was a well-liked married father who worked at a printing company and indulged a passion for hunting and trips to see Italy. Few could have imagined that this ordinary-seeming neighbor was harboring such a dark secret. After his arrest, prosecutors noted that a motive for Lindy's slaying remained unclear and likely lost to time. With DNA evidence as the undeniable witness, the legal case against Sinopoli was strong. Rather than face a trial, Sinopoli ultimately chose to plead guilty. In October 2023, nearly 48 years after Lindy Sue Beckler was slain, a 69-year-old Sinopoli stood in a Lancaster County courtroom and admitted to the offense. He was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison, which, given his age, is effectively a life sentence. In the courtroom, Lindy's family confronted the perpetrator at last, displaying a photo of Lindy and speaking of the lifetime of pain he caused. Though Sinopoli offered a feeble apology, the judge bluntly noted that he showed remorse only because he was caught.